my dears. Thank you so much for joining me today. This should be enough time for everyone to join in, at least those who wish to. There we are. Hello. How is everyone doing today? So, we are here to continue our readings of Irish myths and fairy tales. And it would seem that there might be something a little more special going on either today or tomorrow. We'll just have to see. But let me send out one last tweet really quickly before we continue on. Okay, that should be it. So if you remember from last time, we were reading stories about what they consider the solitary fairies. We received a lot of them in regards to the leprechaun. And so, let us continue with those stories today. Oh, hello, Darla. Thank you so much for coming in. I'm running and I'm vibing, and I'm joining this stream. I'm always so happy to have you, my dear. Our first story for today is called Seeing is Believing, and it is attributed to T. Crofton Crocker. There's a sort of people whom everyone must have met with some time or other. People that pretend to disbelieve what, in their hearts, they believe and are afraid of. Now, Felix O'Driscoll was one of these. Felix was a rattling, rollicking, harum-scarum, devil-may-care sort of fellow. But that's neither here nor there. He was always talking, one nonsense or another, and among the rest of his foolery, he pretended not to believe in the fairies, the Claricones, and the Fukas, or Pukas, pardon me. And he even sometimes had the impudence to affect to doubt of ghosts that everybody believes in at any rate. Yet some people used to wink and look knowingly at when Felix was goistering, for it was observed that he was very shy of the ford of Penamo after nightfall. and that when he was once riding past the old church of Grenoble in the dark, even though he had got enough of poteen in him to make any man stout, he made the horse trot so that there was no keeping up with him, and every now and then he would throw a sharp look over his left shoulder. Did you know that Ireland removed the deferral period for gay men donating blood? Sounds familiar. And how is everything sounding to you all today? Please let me know if there are any issues. One night, there was a parcel of people sitting, drinking, and talking together at Larry Riley's public house, and Felix was one of the party. He was, as usual, getting on with his Bletherumskite about the fairies, and swearing that he did not believe there were any live things, barring men and beasts and birds and fish, and such things as a body could see. And he went on talking in so profane a way of the good people that some of the company grew timid and began to cross themselves, not knowing what might happen, when an old woman called Moriana Holgoon, with a long blue cloak about her, who had been sitting in the chimney corner, smoking her pipe without taking any share in the conversation, took the pipe out of her mouth, threw the ashes out of it, spit in the fire, turning round, looked Felix straight in the eye. And so you don't believe there are such things as claricons, don't you? Felix looked rather daunted, but he said nothing. Upon my troth, it well becomes the like of you, and nothing but a bit of a gossoon, to take upon you to pretend not to believe what your father and your father's father and his father before him never made the least doubt of. But to make the matter short, seeing's believing, they say, and I, that might be your grandmother, tell you there are such things as claricons, and I myself saw one. There's for you now. All the people in the room looked quite surprised at this, and crowded up to the fireplace to listen to her. Felix tried to laugh, but it wouldn't do. Nobody minded him. I remember, said she, some time after I married my honest man, who's now dead and gone, it was by the same token, just a little afore I lay in my first child. That's many a long day ago. I was sitting out in our bit of garden, and with my knitting in my hand, watching some bees that we had that were going to swarm. It was a fine sunshiny day in the middle of June, and the bees were humming and flying backwards and forwards about from their hives, and the birds were chirping and hopping on the bushes, and the butterflies were flying about, and sitting on the flowers, and everything smelt so fresh and so sweet, and I felt so happy that I hardly knew where I was. Oh, thank you for the follow, S_PH1_A. There's a nickname for you. Please let me know. Oh, and welcome in, Game Crazy. Thank you so much for popping in. When all of a sudden I heard, among some rows of beans that we had in a corner of a garden, a noise that went tick-tack, tick-tack, just for all the world as if a broke maker was putting on the heel of a pump. Oh, hello, Flying Trolley. Thank you for resubbing for me. And for 3 months. Thank you so much. I hope I continue to soothe you. Thank you. Lord preserve us, said I to myself. What in the world can that be? So I laid down my knitting and got up and stole softly over to the beans. Never believe me if I did not see sitting there before me, in the middle of them, a bit of an old man, not a quarter so big as a newborn child, with a little cocked hat on his head and a dudeen in his mouth smoking away, and a plain, old-fashioned drab coat with big buttons upon its back, and a pair of massy silver buckles in his shoes that almost covered his feet. They were so big, and he working away as hard as ever he could, feeling a little pair of brogues. As soon as I clapped my 2 eyes upon him, I knew him to be the Cluricone, and as I was stout and foolhardy, I said to him, God save you, honest man, that's hard work you're at this hot day. He looked up in my face quite vexed like, so with that I made a run at him, got a hold of him in my hand, and asked him where was his purse of money. Money, said he, money indeed, and where would a poor little old creature like me get money? Come, come, said I, none of your tricks. Doesn't everybody know that Cluricones like you are as rich as the devil himself? So I pulled out a knife I had in my pocket and put on as wicked a face as I ever could, and, in truth, that was no easy matter for me then, for I was as comely and good-humored a looking girl as you'd have seen from this to Carvganar, and swore if he didn't instantly give me his purse or show me a pot of gold, I'd cut the nose off his face. Well, to be sure, the little man did look so frightened at hearing these words, and I almost found in my heart to pity the poor little creature. Then, said he, come with me just a couple of fields off, and I'll show you where I keep my money. So I went, holding him in my hand and keeping my eyes fixed upon him, when all of a sudden I heard a whiz behind me. There, there, cried he, There's your bees all swarming and going off with themselves. I, like a fool as I was, turned my head round, and when I saw nothing at all and looked back at the cluricaume, I found nothing at all in my hand, for when I had the ill luck to take my eyes off him, he slipped out of my hand just as if he was made of fog or smoke, and the sorrow the foot he ever came nigh my gardens again. And that was an interesting one. The character that they mentioned in the beginning was not involved in this story per se. And once again, to anyone who is more native speaking, I do apologize if any of my enunciations are lacking. Our next story for today is The Field of Bullions, once again attributed to T. Crofton Crocker. Tom Fitzpatrick was the eldest son of a comfortable farmer who lived at Ballincollig. Tom was just turned of 29 when he met the following adventure, and was as clever, clean, tight, good-looking a boy as any in the whole county Cork. One fine day in harvest, it was indeed Lady Day in harvest, that everybody knows to be one of the greatest holidays in the year. Tom was taking a ramble through the ground, and went sauntering along the sunny side of a hedge, thinking in himself, where would be a great harm if people, instead of idling and going about, doing nothing at all, were to shake out the hay and bind and stook the oats that were lying on the ledge, especially as the weather has been rather broken of late. He all of a sudden heard a clacking sort of sound behind him in the hedge. "Dear me," said Tom, "but isn't it surprising to hear the stone chatters singing so late in the season?" So Tom stole on, going on the tops of his toes to try if he could get a sight of what was making the noise, to see if he was right in his guess. The noise stopped, but as Tom looked sharply through the bushes, what should he see in the nook of the hedge but a brown pitcher that might hold about 1.5 gallons of liquor, and by a wee dinny dainty bit of a man, an old man with a little motty of a cocked hat stuck upon the top of his head, and a dishy-dowshy leather apron hanging before him, pulled out a little wooden stool and stood up upon it and dipped a little piggin into the pitcher, and took out the full of it, and put it beside the stool, and then sat down under the pitcher and began to work at putting a heel piece on a bit of brogue just fitting for himself. "Well, by the powers," said Tom to himself, "I'd often heard tell of the Claricone, and to tell God's truth," said Tom to himself, "I never rightly believed in them. But here's one of them in real earnest. If I go knowingly to work, I'm a made man. But here's one of them in. They say a body must never take their eyes off them, or they'll escape. Oh. Tom now stole on a little further, with his eye fixed on the little man, just as a cat does with a mouse, or, as we read in books, a rattlesnake does with the birds he wants to enchant. So when he got up quite close to him, "God bless your work, neighbor," said Tom. The little man raised up his head and, "Thank you kindly," said he. "I wonder you'd be working on the holiday," said Tom. "That's my own business, not yours," was the reply. "Well, maybe you'd be civil enough to tell us what you've got in the pitcher there," said Tom. "That I will with pleasure," said he. "It's good beer." "Beer," said Tom. "Thunder and fire. Where did you get it?" "Where did I get it, is it? Why, I made it. And what do you think I made it of?" "Devil a one of me knows," said Tom. "But of malt, I suppose. What else?" "There you're out. I made it of heath." "Of heath," said Tom, bursting out laughing. "Sure you didn't think me to be such a fool as to believe that." "Do as you please," said he. "But what I tell you is the truth. Did you never hear tell of the Danes?" "That I did," said Tom. "Weren't them the fellows we gave such a licking when they thought to take Limerick from us?" "Hm," said the little man dryly. "Is that all you know about the matter?" "Well, what about them Danes?" said Tom. "Why, all the about them there is that when they were here, they taught us to make beer out of the heath, and the secret's in my family ever since." "Will you give a body a taste of your beer?" said Tom. "I'll tell you what it is, young man. It would be fitter for you to be looking after your father's property than to be bothering decent, quiet people with your foolish questions. There now, while you're idling away your time here, there's the cows have broken into the oats and are knocking the corn all about." Tom was taken so by surprise with this, and he was just on the very point of turning round when he recollected himself. So, afraid that the like might happen again, he made a grab for the Claricone and caught him up in his hand, but in his hurry he overset the pitcher and spilt all the beer, so that he would not get a taste of it to tell what sort it was. He then swore what he would not do to him if he did not show him where his money was. Tom looked so wicked and so bloody-minded that the little man was quite frightened. "So," says he, "come along with me a couple of fields off, and I'll show you a crock of gold." So they went, and Tom held the Cluricane fast in his hand and never took his eyes off him, though they had to cross hedges and ditches and a crooked bit of bog, where the Cluricane seemed, out of pure mischief, to pick out the hardest and most contrary way, till at last they came to a great field, all full of ballown bogies, or ragweed, and the Cluricane pointed to a big bullion and said he, dig under that, and you'll get the great crock o' full of Guinness. Tom, in his hurry, never minded to bring a spade with him, though he thought to run home and fetch one, and that he might know the place again. He took off on one of his red garters and tied it round the bullion. I suppose, said the Cluricane very civilly, you've no further occasion for me? No, says Tom, you may go now, if you please, and God speed you, and may you, good luck attend you wherever you go. Well, goodbye to you, Tom Fitzpatrick, said the Cluricane, and much good may do you with what you'll get. So Tom ran for the dear life till he came home, got a spade, and then away with him as hard as he could, back to the field. But when he got there, lo and behold, not a bullion in the field, but had a red garter, a very identical model to his own, tied about it. And as for digging up the whole field, that was all nonsense, for there was more than 40 good Irish acres in it. So Tom went home again with his spade on his shoulder, a little cooler than he went, and many the hearty curse he gave to the Cluricane every time he thought of the next turn he had served him. You're always so keen on bothering working men. Poor dears. Our next story for today is called The Little Shoe, once again attributed to T. Crofton Crocker. Now tell me, Molly, said Mr. Coots to Molly Cogan as he met her on the road one day, close to one of the old gateways of Killimach. Did you ever hear of the Cluricane? Yes, but no worries, Game Crazy. Is it the Cluricane? Why then I sure did. Often and often. Many's the time I've heard my father, rest his soul, tell about them over and over again. But did you ever see one, Molly? Did you ever see one yourself? Oh, no, I never seen one in my life. My grandfather, that's my father's father, you know, he see one time and caught him too. Caught him? Oh, Molly, tell me how was that? Why then, I'll tell you. My grandfather, you see, was out there above in the bog, drawing home turf, and the poor old mare was tired after her day's work, and the old man went out to the stable to look after her and to see if she was eating her hay. And when he came to the stable door there, my dear, he heard something hammering, 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 just for all the world like a shoemaker making a shoe, and whistling all the time in the prettiest tune he had ever heard in his life before. Well, my grandfather, he thought it was a claricum, and he said to himself, I'll catch you if I can, and then I'll have money enough always. So he opened the door very quietly and didn't make a bit of noise in the world that ever was heard, and he looked all about, but never a bit of the little man he could see anywhere. But he heard him hammering and whistling, and so he looked and looked till at last he did see the little fellow. And where was he, do you think, but in the girth under the mare? And there he was, with his little bit of an apron on him, and his hammer in hand, and a little red nightcap on his head, and he was making a shoe, and he was so busy with his work, and he was hammering and whistling so loud, that he never minded my grandfather till he caught him fast in his hand. Faith, I have you now, says he, and I'll never let you go till I get your purse. That's what I won't. So give it here to me once now. Stop, stop, says the claricum. Stop, stop, says he, till I get it for you. So my grandfather, like a fool, you see, opened his hand a little more, and the little fellow jumped away laughing, and you never saw him any more. And never a bit of the purse did he get. Only the claricum left his little shoe that he was making. And my grandfather was mad enough, angry with himself for letting him go, but he had the shoe all his life, and my own mother told me she often sees it and had it in her hand, and it was the prettiest little shoe she ever saw. And did you see it yourself, Molly? Oh, no, my dear. It was long lost before I was born, but my mother told me about it often and often enough. Interesting that we are getting some stories that are more secondhand, as opposed to a story directly involving a person. Our next story for today is called The Haunted Cellar, attributed to T. Crofton Crocker. There are few people who had not heard of the McCarthys, one of the real old Irish families, with the true Milesian blood running in their veins as thick as buttermilk. Many were the clans of this family in the south, as the McCarthy Moor, and the McCarthy Ree, and the McCarthy of Muskerry, and all of them were noted for their hospitality to strangers, gentle and simple. But not one of the name or of any other exceeded Justin McCarthy of Ballinaccarthy at putting plenty to eat and drink upon his table, and there was a right hearty welcome for anyone who would share it with him. Many a wine cellar would be ashamed of the name if that was Ballinaccarthy was the proper pattern for one. Large as the cellar was crowded with bins and wine, and long rows of pipes and hogsheads and casks. It would take more time to count them than any sober man could spare in such a place, with plenty to drink about him and a hearty welcome to do so. There are many, no doubt, who would think that the butler would have little to complain of in such a house, and the whole country round would have agreed with them if a man could be found to remain as McCarthy's butler for any length of time worth speaking of. Yet not one who had been in his service gave him a bad word. We have no faults, they would say, to find with the master, and if he could but get any one to fetch his wine from the cellar, we might every one of us have grown grey in the house, and have lived quiet and contented enough in his service until the end of our days. It's a queer thing, surely, that young Jack Learney, a lad who had been brought up from a mere child in the stables at Ballinaccarthy to assist in taking care of the horses, and had occasionally lent a hand in the butler's pantry. It's a mighty queer thing, surely, that one man after another will not content himself with the best place in the house of a good master, but that every one of them must quit, all through the means, as they say, of the wine cellar. If the master, long life to him, would but make me his butler, I warrant never the word more would be heard of grumbling at his bidding to go to the wine cellar. Young Leary accordingly watched for what he conceived to be a favorable opportunity of presenting himself to the notice of his master. A few mornings after, Mr. McCarthy went into his stable yard rather earlier than usual, and called loudly for the groom to saddle his horse, as he was intended to go out with the hounds. But there was no groom to answer, and young Jack Leary led Rainbow out of the stable. "Where is William?" inquired Mr. McCarthy. "Sir," said Jack, and Mr. McCarthy repeated the question. "Is it William, please your honor?" returned Jack. "Why then, to tell the truth, he had just one drop too much last night." "Where did he get it?" said Mr. McCarthy, "for since Thomas went away, the key of the wine cellar has been in my pocket, and I have been obliged to fetch what I was drank myself." "Sorrow I know," said Leary, unless the cook had given him at least a taste in life of whiskey. "But," continued he, performing a low bow by seizing with his right hand a lock of hair, and pulling down his head by it, whilst his left leg, which had been put forward, was scraped back along against the ground. May I make so bold as just to ask your honor one question? Speak out, Jack, said Mr. McCarthy. Why then does your honor want a butler? Can you recommend me one? Returned his master, with a smile of good humor upon his countenance, and one who will not be afraid of going into my wine cellar. Is the wine cellar all the matter? Said young Leary. Devil a doubt I have of myself then for that. So you mean to offer me your services in the capacity of butler? Said Mr. McCarthy with some surprise. Exactly so, returned young Leary, for now the first time looking up from the ground. Well, I believe you to be a good lad, and I have no objection to give you a trial. Long may your honor reign over us, and the Lord spare you to us, ejaculated Leary. Interesting choice of words in the story. With another national bow, as his master rode off, and he continued for some time to gaze after him with a vacant stare, which slowly and gradually assumed a look of importance. Jack Leary, he said at length. Jack. Is it Jack? In a tone of wonder. Faith, 'tis not Jack now, Mr. John, the butler. And with an air of becoming consequence, he strided out of the stable yard towards the kitchen. It is of little purport to my story, although it may afford an instructive lesson to the reader, to depict the sudden transition of nobody to somebody. Jack's former stable companion, a poor, superannuated hound named Bran, who had been accustomed to receive many an affectionate pat on his head, was spurned from him with a kick and an "out of my way, sirrah." Indeed, poor Jack's memory seemed sadly affected by his sudden change of situation. What established the point beyond all doubt was him almost forgetting the pretty face of Peggy, the kitchen wench, whose heart he had assailed but the preceding week by the offer of purchasing a gold ring for the fourth finger of her right hand, and a lusty imprint of goodwill upon her lips. When Mr. McCarthy returned from hunting, he sent for Jack Leary, so he still continued to call his new butler. Jack, said he, I believe you are a trustworthy lad, and here are the keys of my cellar. I have asked the gentleman with whom I hunted today to dine with me, and I hope they may be satisfied with the way in which you will wait on them at table. But, above all, let there be no want of wine after dinner. Mr. John, having a tolerably quick eye for such things, and being naturally a handy lad, spread his cloth accordingly, laid his plates and knives and forks in the same manner he had seen his predecessors in the office perform these mysteries, and really for the first time got through attendance on dinner very well. It must not be forgotten, however, that it was at the house of an Irish country squire, who was entertaining a company of booted and spurned fox hunters, not very particular about what are considered matters of infinite importance under the circumstances and in other societies. For instance, few of McCarthy's guests, though all excellent and worthy men in their own way, cared much whether the punch pursued after soup was made of Jamaica or Antigua rum. Some would even not have been inclined to question the correctness of good old Irish whiskey, and with the exception of their liberal host himself, every one in the company preferred the port which Mr. McCarthy put on his table to the less ardent flavor of claret, a choice rather at variance with modern sentiment. It was waxing near midnight when Mr. McCarthy rung the bell 3 times. It was a signal for more wine, and Jack proceeded to the cellar to procure a fresh supply, but it must be confessed, not without some little hesitation. The luxury of ice was then unknown to the south of Ireland, but the superiority of cool wine has been acknowledged by all men of sound judgment and true taste. The grandfather of Mr. McCarthy, who had built the mansion of Ballinaccarthy upon the site of an old castle which had belonged to his ancestors, was fully aware of this important fact, and in the construction of his magnificent wine cellar had availed himself a deep vault, excavated out the solid rock in former times, as a place of retreat and security. The descent into this vault was by a flight of steep stone stairs, and here and there in the wall were narrow passages, I ought rather call them crevices, and also certain projections which cast deep shadows, and looked very frightful when anyone went down the cellar stairs without a single light. Indeed, the 2 lights did not much improve the matter, for though the breadth of the shadows became less, the narrow crevices remained as dark and darker than ever. Summoning up all his resolution, down went the new butler, bearing in his right hand a lantern and the key of the cellar, and in his left a basket which he considered sufficiently capacious to contain an adequate stock for the remainder of the evening. He arrived at the door without any interruption, however, but when he put the key, which was an ancient and clumsy kind, for it was before the days of Grandma's patent, and turned it in the lock, he thought he heard a strange kind of laughing within the cellar, to which some empty bottles that stood up upon the floor outside vibrated so violently that they struck against one another. In this he could not be mistaken, although he may have been deceived in the laugh, for the bottles were just at his feet, and he saw them in motion. Leary paused for a moment and looked about him with becoming caution. He then boldly seized the handle of the key and turned it with all his strength in the lock, as if he doubted his own power of doing so, and the door flew open with a most tremendous crash. if the house had not been built upon solid rock, would have shook it from the foundation. To recount what the poor fellow saw would be impossible, for he seems not to know very clearly himself. But what he told the cook the next morning was that he heard a roaring and bellowing like a mad bull, and that all the pipes and the hogsheads and casks in the cellar went rocking backwards and forwards with so much force that he thought every one would have been staved in, and that he would have been drowned or smothered in wine. When Leary recovered, he made his way back as well as he could to the dining room, where he found his master and the company very impatient for his return. "What kept you?" said Mr. McCarthy in an angry voice. "And where is the wine? I rung for it half an hour since." "The wine is in the cellar, I hope, sir," said Drac, trembling violently. "I hope 'tis not all lost." "What do you mean, fool?" exclaimed Mr. McCarthy in a still more angry tone. "Why did you not fetch some with you?" Jack looked wildly about him and only uttered a deep groan. "Gentlemen," said Mr. McCarthy to his guests, "this is too much. When I next see you to dinner, I hope it will be another house, for it is impossible I can no longer remain in this, where a man has no command over his own wine cellar, and cannot get a butler to do his duty. I have long thought of moving from Ballinaccarthy, and I am now determined, with the blessing of God, to leave it tomorrow. But the wine shall you have where I to go to myself to the cellar for it." "But wine shall you have were I to go myself to the cellar for it." So saying, he rose from the table, took the key and lantern from his half-stupefied servant, who regarded him with a look of vacancy, and descended the narrow stairs already described which led to the cellar. When he arrived at the door, which he found open, he thought he heard a noise as if of rats or mice scrambling about the casks, and on advancing perceived a little figure about 6 inches in height, seated astride upon the pipe of an oldest port in the place, and bearing a cig-pot upon his shoulder. Raising the lantern, Mr. McCarthy contemplated the little fellow with wonder. He wore a red nightcap upon his head. Before him was a short leather apron, which now, from his attitude, fell rather on one side, and he had stockings of a light blue color, so long as to nearly cover the entire of his leg, with shoes having huge silver buckles in them, and with high heels, perhaps out of vanity to make him appear taller. His face was like a withered winter apple, and his nose, which was of a bright crimson color, about the tip wore a delicate purple bloom like that of a plum, yet his eyes twinkled like those mites with candied dew and moony nights, and his mouth twitched up to one side with an arch grin. "Ha, scoundrel!" exclaimed Mr. McCarthy. "Have I found you at last, disturber of my cellar? What are you doing there?" "Sure, and master," returned the little fellow, looking up at him with one eye, and with the other throwing a shy glance toward the spigot on his shoulder. "And we going to move tomorrow? You sure you would not leave your little own hurricane Naginin behind you?" "Oh, but Mr. McCarthy, if you were to follow me, Master Nagini, I don't see much use in quitting Balinacarthy." So, filling with wine the basket which young Leary in his fright had left behind him, and locking the cellar door, he rejoined his guests. For some years after, Mr. McCarthy had always to fetch the wine for his table himself, as the little Hurricane Nagini seemed to feel a personal respect towards him. Notwithstanding the labor of these journeys, the worthy lord of Balinacarthy lived in his paternal mansion to a good round age, and the famous to the last for the excellence of his wine, and the convivial of his company. But at the time of his death, the same eventuality had nearly emptied his wine cellar, and as it was never so well filled again, nor so often visited, the revels of Master Nagini became less celebrated, and are now only spoken of amongst the legendary lore of our country. It is even said that the poor little fellow took the declination of the cellar so to heart that he became negligent and careless of himself, and that he had been sometimes seen going about without hardly a screed to cover him. Some, however, believe that he turned baroque maker, and assert that they have seen him at work, and heard him whistling as merry a blackbird on a May morning, under the shadow of a brown jug of foaming ale, bigger, bigger than himself, dressed decently enough, they say, only looking mighty old. But still 'tis clear he has his wits about him, since no one ever had the luck to catch him, or to get a hold of the purse he has with him, which they call spree na skillna, and 'tis said is never without a shilling in it. And that, my dears, is where I will call it for today. We have been quite lucky in that the entire stream went by without crashing. But thank you all so much for joining me today. I always greatly appreciate the company. You could be anywhere in the world, but you are here with me, listening to me reading you stories. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day, be it the day, night, or evening, whatever time it may be for you. May it be wonderful. But until I next see you, my dears, I'm afraid we have to call this adieu. Until next time, ta!